All right. And I'm admitting all. I'll see y'all in a little bit.
All right. We have everyone in the room now. All right. Welcome, everybody. This is our next session for the Lift Challenge coaching session. And we're excited to have Jen Weiss with us, who's with the North Carolina Clean Energy Fund. And how this runs is Jen will give a talk about the work that she does, talk about some blended finances related to energy, and then have it really most of the time open to questions. So be thinking about questions as related to your projects. And yeah, I'm not going to share a whole lot more. I'll just go ahead and turn it over to Jen to introduce herself. And yeah, and we'll get going.
Hey, thanks, Tracy. And thanks, Jeff. I know you're behind the scenes there. Hi, everyone. So yes, Tracy said, love your questions either in the chat or feel free to, I'll try to watch and see if there's one that comes up while I'm talking, if something comes to mind, but definitely ask questions. I'm going to try to cover a couple of basics about the Clean Energy Fund as well as green banks in general. And yeah, and then open it up for discussion. So I'm going to share some slides just to kind of help us with the conversation. So let me know, give me a thumbs up, Tracy, if you can see this. Good, okay. So yeah, so I'm Jen Weiss. As Tracy said, I'm the co-director of the North Carolina Clean Energy Fund. We are a nonprofit green bank, and I'll talk about what that means in just a second. And so what I wanted to do today, like I said, was just give you a little bit of an overview of what green banks are in the blended finance space, talk about what they do and what their objectives are, and then talk more specifically about the North Carolina Clean Energy Fund. We are a startup organization, and so we're just getting our feet on the ground, but we really take a lot of lessons and great things that are happening from our other sister and brother green banks. So I'll talk a little bit about that. So if I can get these to advance. There we go. All right. So green banks in general, they fill market gaps. And so they started probably about, I want to say 13, 14 years ago as ways to advance clean energy and climate type of financing, because at the time there wasn't a lot of it being done. And I think that's still true in some cases today. And one of the reasons that you're seeing so many new green banks come around. So, but we're all mission-driven institutions. We want to use innovative financing, and we want to accelerate their transition to clean energy and fight climate change. So that is really within every one of our mission and value statements, you will see those words. We are not a depository financial institution. So we don't take deposits. We're not regulated the way regular banks and credit unions are, which makes us a little bit more flexible, a little bit more nimble. But we're able to partner with those types of institutions. And that's one of the things that we really aim to do, is to focus on partnering with other financial institutions to help them do more lending in the clean energy space. So what we do is mobilize public capital, and we want to mobilize that to attract private investment into underserved markets. And I highlighted underserved here because this is really important. If something's already being done in the clean energy space, we probably won't play a role in it because it's already market-based and the need is already being filled. But where we aim to go into is where there might be market gaps. Where are things happening? There should be clean energy financing, but there's not. And so we'll look for those gaps, we'll look for partnership opportunities, and we'll develop programs and products around that. So we want to make it easier to finance projects in new markets, perhaps new geographies, new technologies, and I should specifically say here in underserved markets, so low income and disadvantaged communities. And you're seeing a lot of that wording coming out of a lot of the Inflation Reduction Act funding that we're seeing come to be. And so finally, what we usually do is use financing and credit enhancements, and we don't do grants. So it's all a financing type of a field, but we do work with people who are grant givers and incentives and other utility incentives to bring down the cost so that we can get more people into the clean energy space and doing investment in the space. I want to put this up from one of my sister organizations, the Connecticut Green Bank. Connecticut Green Bank is one of the first green banks that was established, and it was established in 2011. Now, the Connecticut Green Bank is quasi-public, and by that I mean they are partially funded by the state. They were actually set up through their General Assembly through enabling legislation, and they receive funding through primarily the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, or RGGI funds. But they use that funding, and this is why I like this graphic so much, they use that purple funding, that public funding little dollar that you can see there, to attract private investment. And so they'll do that through different credit enhancements, different partnerships, maybe offering guarantees, but they attract this other private capital so that they can do all of these great projects to increase social and environmental impact. So you can see a lot of the different buckets and things that they try to do, but it's really starting with that initial public investment that is used to attract the rest. So I like to use this slide because it really shows, I think, what we're trying to do in the green bank space. There is a national network of green banks today. This is a slide from July of 2023, but it continues to grow. The darker green is where there is more than one green bank. Lighter green is where things are developing, and then there's flavors in between. Across the United States, since 2011, when Connecticut Green Bank first was established, they've driven over $14 billion in investment. And in 2022 alone, it was a little over 4.5 billion, including 1.2 billion in low income and disadvantaged communities. So remember, I said green banks really, that's one of our focal areas, is to make sure that those disadvantaged communities are receiving the funding that they need. And the Coalition for Green Capital, which is a national nonprofit, is working to establish a network of green banks across. So you can see the lighter green here, the lighter turquoise, is where they're working right now, because eventually we want to have green banks in every of our 50 states and territories, and partner together and make sure that we're all working in unison. So we're very collaborative. We're not competitive at all. We try to work as much as we can with them. So here in North Carolina, as I mentioned, we're a nonprofit, so we weren't established by any sort of state legislation, and we did that on purpose. Here in North Carolina, the likelihood of us getting approved would probably not have been anything that the General Assembly would have passed. But as a nonprofit, we can be very flexible in the types of products and financing that we offer. We are a 501c3 status with the IRS, which means we can accept charitable donations from foundations, which makes it really easy for us to get, not easy, but we get money to be able to build our capacity to be able to do other types of loans. It all came out of a report that I did a few years ago when I was at the Duke University's Nicholas Institute. We looked at how a green bank can drive the energy economy, clean energy economy here in North Carolina. And one of the things we tried to do within that report is identify the market gaps. And what we uncovered at the time is still true today. There are gaps in investment into renewable power, into building efficiency, clean transportation, agriculture, resiliency projects, and a whole lot more. So even though the financial space is coming around and doing a lot of clean energy lending, it isn't ubiquitous across the entire landscape. And so we want to continue to build the ecosystem, and that's where green banks come in. So one of the tenets that we have is, if it already works, don't replicate it. Like I said before, if it's already something that's being done, there's no need for green banks to get engaged. But where we will get engaged is to fill those market gaps. And we'll work with our partners throughout the lending space to accelerate and strengthen their ability to do more. I always love to say I'm working myself out of a job. Eventually, all of this lending will be mainstream and market-based, and we won't be needed. But I don't see that in the foreseeable future. So for now, I have a job. Just to give you an idea of a couple of program examples, just wanted to share a couple things that we're looking at from the North Carolina Clean Energy Fund perspective. Really been hearing about the need for consumer loans, especially low interest consumer loans that can really take off electrification campaigns. So maybe we would offer some sort of a credit enhancement, like a loan loss reserve, or perhaps an interest rate buy down that would attract our partners in the credit unions and the community development financial institution space, also mission-based lenders. Or perhaps it might be to do loans for health and safety repairs, which aren't generally considered clean energy. But what those will do is enable a house to receive other sorts of weatherization assistance, or perhaps prepare a home for a solar deployment if perhaps the roof needed repair. So we can do loans for that in order to encourage other types of lending for different types of projects. And the last thing I'll say here is it's really important for all of the clean energy investment is workforce development. So we work very closely with the contractor network to make sure that they have the capacity to be able to do these programs once we launch it. We don't want to be launching financial programs if there's no one that can actually deploy the technology. So we work very closely with the contractor networks. A second area that we're looking very closely into is bridges to financial incentives. Any of you that have been looking at the Inflation Reduction Act that was signed last year knows that there's some great rebates and tax credits, some of which may have a little bit of a time lag before when the consumer or the business or the nonprofit might be able to receive that. And so what we want to do is eliminate any stress or something where people can't get that capital up front. We might do the lending up front, being repaid through that tax credit or that rebate, which would come later. So that's not only the IRA tax credits and rebates, but also that could apply to utility rebates as well. And then the last thing we're looking at is some of the federal programs that we're seeing through Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law have cost share requirements. It could be up to as much as 20% of the grant amount, which means that for small businesses, especially, they might not have that 20% that they could invest in order to be eligible for the federal program. And so we'll look to do some sort of a low interest loan to help them with that cost share and let them be able to access that larger amount of money from the federal government. And then finally, I used to be with the North Carolina Department of Transportation. And so transportation and fleet transition is very top of mind for me. So in addition to all the renewable energy and building efficiency projects, we want to be looking very closely at our transportation industry and be helping with any projects there for the transition to cleaner transportation options. So that might include chargers or electrical upgrades for EV investments. It might also include the vehicles themselves. And so just listening to the market to find out where those gaps might be in that type of an industry. So before I turn it over to all of your questions, I wanted to give you a specific example that we're working on here in North Carolina. In the western part of our state is Buncombe County. You may have heard of the city of Asheville. They're very forward thinking with reducing greenhouse gases, especially from a consumer residential perspective. And so we're working with them to standardize a consumer loan product to drive electrification there in Buncombe County. And the first pilot that we're going to do is a focus on heat pumps. So electrifying either gas or alternative fuels types of furnaces. They're a morning peak type of a place, and get them into something that's much more efficient and an electric heat pump. We're also going to be looking at heat pump hot water heaters for the same reason. Within this pilot, what we want to do is engage the local lenders and contractors to be a part of this. So I mentioned before, it's an ecosystem. It can't just be one lender going in and doing all of this. It's got to be a group of us collaboratively working together. We will provide the financing platform, and we will include as many of the utility and the IRA rebates as we can to bring down the cost of the final heat pump or heat pump water heater. The reason this is so interesting to me is it's the blended finance idea. The county funded a $100,000 loan loss reserve to cover any losses that might come out of the program. And with that loss reserve, we are working with 2 to 3 local credit unions to help them feel comfortable to reduce their risk of becoming engaged in this program and having a rate that's, like I said, sub 10%, hopefully even lower than that. And so the loss reserve will cover any losses that they have, but they will actually be doing the lending themselves, and that will come from their own capital. And so with this $100,000 public investment from the county, if we did 400 loans at $10,000 a piece, or if the credit unions did, that would be $4 million in private investment. So as you can see, really leveraging that smaller amount of public investment, but attracting private investment into the ecosystem. And so this is just an example of one pilot. We hope to learn from this pilot and expand this across the state, and then add to it the different types of appliances and uses that we can do for it. So we'll continue to work with other credit unions across the state. We'll continue to work with other local governments. We'll work with state agencies and roll out something like this across our state. So that is me, Jen Weiss. I am the co-director of the Clean Energy Fund, and that's my email address. And I will turn off screen sharing. I see there's a couple of questions in the chat already. And let's dive in. I don't know, Tracy, if you want to call any out. Oh, they're all AI assistants.
Yeah,
Never mind.
Yeah. I was like,
it.
well, I think it's
Good thing I didn't look at that earlier.
Yeah, if you all have questions for Jan, feel free to unmute or raise your hand and go ahead and ask your questions. We still have people joining too.
Hey, Jen.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Victoria. You got it.
I just wanted to ask a bit about the policy leg of things, particularly like how lobbying might play a role in what you guys are doing at the Clean Energy Fund?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I said right at the beginning, one of the reasons that we set it up as a nonprofit is so that we weren't tied as much to the General Assembly and any lobbying efforts that might be needed. But that being said, we would fully embrace any funding we might be able to receive through the state budget every year. And so we work closely with some state agencies and the governor's office to see if there might be ways that we can fund different types of programs. So I think from a lobbying perspective, I think getting money in the budget for us, especially for something like a loss reserve, where we could use that to attract even more types of financial institutions would be really great. I think the other piece is just generally speaking, the amount of money that can flow to either the state agencies or to their partners. There's a couple of academic institutions, which are clean energy hubs. The more money that flows through them, the more that we can do in the clean energy space and collaborate together to do more things. So I would say those are the two areas that come most top of mind for me, Victoria.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, Jen, you kind of touched on this in your last response there. So I guess for something like the Asheville project, on top of the $100,000 loss reserve, do the private investors, the credit unions, have any expectation for like lower return when compared to other projects that could be invested in, or how do you kind of level set with them in that regard?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Yeah, so I mentioned we're trying to get below 10%. One of the things that we found, especially with credit unions, is they want to be mission-based lenders. They want to be lending to this area, but they don't understand clean energy. And so they typically, if they do offer a product at all, it's usually at a higher rate because they don't know what the returns or what the losses are going to be for it. So with that loss reserve, the conversations that we've been having with these credit unions, it makes them feel more comfortable to try this. And again, it's a pilot for them too, right? So it's a pilot for us. It's a pilot for Buncombe County. It's a pilot for them. They want to see what type of losses, but they know that they're going to be covered because we have that reserve. And then the second piece I'll add to that is we've been talking about in the cases where maybe getting it to like a 9%, 8% type rate still isn't enough to attract our lower income households that we want to be part of these programs. There may be opportunities for us to offer a interest rate buy down. So we could actually take the interest rate that's being offered by the credit union. The Clean Energy Fund would buy that down to a rate that's more I guess feasible to the low income customer. And so the credit union would still have their regular rate. We just buy it down so it's a lower rate for the end user.
That makes a lot of sense. And if you don't mind me asking a follow-up, you mentioned just kind of offering clarity on the clean energy products. Does that come from the Green Bank, or are there other kind of subject matter experts that you're using to help support that?
Both. Yeah. So we will do as much as we can from a clean energy financing perspective to talk about the different tools that they can use for clean energy. And so we've actually put together a couple of Green Bank 101, Green Energy Lending 101 type of webinars and things that we're going to continue to do. But beyond that, we will bring in experts. So heat pumps might not be something that I'm particularly an expert on, but we know people that are experts. And so what we try to do is in this kind of collaboration between the contractors and the lenders and us, we could even have the contractors educate them. And actually, in some cases, we need to have the contractors educated because heat pumps are relatively new for some of them as well. And so we're finding where those knowledge gaps might be and then developing different types of tools and resources around them, which then we can use obviously to share with others across the state or even regionally as well.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Other questions?
Hi, Jen. I'm Royce, and I'm a sophomore at George Washington University. And I looked at your website really quickly, and you guys say that you guys partner with public and private investors to provide capital to deploy sustainable financing. So my question is your financing restricted to specifically US-owned entities, or is it also open for foreign companies that have interest in advancing solar panels within North Carolina or other areas?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So yeah, I'm glad you added that second part because my first thought was to say we don't generally work outside of our state, but if what you're proposing is bringing something to the North Carolina population, then yes, we would definitely want to partner with an organization to do that. It's really about, growing the accessibility to different products and different financing tools within our state. But then I should also add to that too, that there are some green banks that actually do international work. New York Green Bank, and I think even Connecticut are good examples of that. So the larger green banks that have been around for a little bit longer actually do work internationally as well.
Got it. And a follow-on question, given that the green supply chain is becoming an increasing national security concern for the states, would green banks, North Carolina and other green banks included, are there restrictions on financing if a company is using Chinese supply chain sourced components?
Yeah, so the answer is going to be it depends. And what it depends on is where the funding source is coming from, where we're getting our capital. There's a lot of capital that's coming through the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, which is part of the Inflation Reduction Act. It was an EPA, it's an EPA funding opportunity that all the green banks have applied for, and will be receiving a significant amount of capital, fingers crossed, from it. Within that, there are quite a few different Buy America, Build America type of requirements. And so I can't say specifically, Royce, whether that would be something that would work for a Chinese manufacturer, but you'd have to look at it pretty closely if that was the funding that the Green Bank was using to work with your organization. So that's true of all of the different Inflation Reduction Acts. So it's really going to depend on which of the funding sources the Green Bank is using to do the financing that you're working on with them.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, I know that's a crazy answer, but it's true. But I mean, to be clear, like Connecticut Green Bank gets money from their state, right? And so they might be able to use that money a little bit differently than we would be able to use federal money or something coming from North Carolina. So it really does depend.
Good question so far.
And sorry, another follow-up question.
Yeah.
So I'm not too aware of North Carolina's policies with aggregating sales, energy or electricity sales to the North Carolina grid. Is there any presence of virtual power plant models in North Carolina? And if there is, what is the success of it thus far?
Yeah, you're going a little beyond my knowledge, but I can tell you that like our largest investor-owned utility is Duke Energy. They're looking at virtual power plants, but they have not implemented anything. And I think that's probably going to be a few years off in North Carolina.
Got it.
There's others, though, that are further ahead than us. So I'm not sure if you're just looking at North Carolina or if you're looking beyond, but there certainly are others, especially ones that are in the different RTOs up in the Northeast, especially. So again, not to point you to Connecticut and New York again, but those areas are a little bit more progressive when it comes to virtual power plants and things like that.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, I have a question about the development of the Green Bank as well. So I guess, what does it look like as a Green Bank, and I guess specifically you all as well, kind of develops throughout the years? Is it just kind of larger and more deal flow, or is there kind of a change in, I guess, strategy as well? I guess a little bit of input into that would be great.
Darian, are you talking about the different types of products we develop, or how we got developed initially?
The different types of products, yes. Products,
yeah. Okay, so we in North Carolina for the Clean Energy Fund are looking at where there are gaps for residential customers, small businesses, nonprofits. So we're really mission focused, looking at the smaller types of projects, and so you're going to find us with very small products, hopefully aggregating them so that we can maybe sell them on the secondary market, but really we're filling that niche. That being said, there are others like New York Green Bank and then a Green Bank out in California that do much larger projects. So they might be investing in wind farms, and they might be investing in larger solar projects that maybe couldn't be done without them. So it does, again, depend on what the need is within the state and then what the mission focus is of the Green Bank. But I hope, as I mentioned before, we're very flexible. And so I think what we try to do is pivot as we see the need. Here in North Carolina, we're startup. We know that there's a need within these smaller market areas. But as we grow and as we learn more about North Carolina, there may be other opportunities for us to invest in other types of projects that might be a little bit larger. And then I'll add one more thing. Sorry, you didn't ask this question, but I'm going to add it anyway. So one of the things that North Carolina is looking at is the Department of Energy has a loan programs office, which received, I want to say in the $300 to $400 billion in funding that can be used for clean energy technologies and projects. That's a much larger, obviously, pot of money, right? And so when you start to think about that type of money, you could look at much larger type of programs. Here in North Carolina, wind might be a really good example of a program that we might consider in the future and develop, larger capitalization programs for a wind project using that type of dollars, because we'd be able to access those hopefully in the future. If that didn't answer your question, please feel free to follow up.
No, that was great. Thank you.
Anyone
Hey,
else?
Jen.
All
No-
right, go ahead.
Another question for me here. I'm curious from the consumer perspective how you go about education on some of these projects. It feels like underserved communities would be less educated in something like green energy technology. So curious how you get adoption from them to utilize these programs.
I am so glad you asked that question, Andrew. And I should have mentioned that. So, I mentioned our ecosystem, what we're trying to build. We're also trying to work very closely with community-based organizations. So whether that's a faith-based organization, whether that's a community center, whether that's a nonprofit food bank, wherever people are going, we want to be working with them to help them be able to share this information, because we firmly believe that it's got to be a trusted advisor that's telling you about something like this. No one's going to think about, well, no one. Some of us might think about putting solar panels on our roof, but often that's not the first thing on your mind. You're thinking about how to pay your rent, where to get your food, where to get health care. And so I think in order for us to be really effective, we need to work with community-based organizations that are already talking to these households and help them understand that by reducing their energy burden, by doing energy efficiency or solar programs, they're going to be able to reduce that cost, which can be used for other things. So very tied together, trying to break down those silos and working with people that are across the board, looking at all the different things that are affecting those households.
Makes a lot of sense. Thanks, Jen.
Good questions. Love it.
So maybe you can talk a little bit about how you measure social and environmental impact to determine success, and then what you would suggest for these student teams that are, from all over the world, what they should be thinking about when they're looking at how to measure impact.
Yeah, that's a good question. So our largest funding source, the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, is going to ask us to track greenhouse gas reductions. So we are definitely, that is a metric that we're going to use. But I want to set that aside because I think that's the metric that we all think about. I think there's a lot of other things that we at the Clean Energy Fund look at, and that's accessibility. How many people had access to funding that they wouldn't have ordinarily had? So kind of that additionality type of perspective, that we're offering something to someone that didn't have access to it before. I think workforce is a big component, again, not normally thought of when you think about financing, but we want to be able to make sure that people are not only getting financing, but they're also actually maybe getting access to these new types of jobs, building capacity within their small business, just opening up the opportunities for them from a wealth building perspective that wasn't there before. And so we're going to do a lot of tracking on that as well. How does that actually help our communities that we're serving? What does that look like? And it's not always greenhouse gas reductions. And I had a third one and now I've lost it, Tracy. It may come back to me again. I mean, I think those are the biggest ones, right? I mean, I think we really want to make sure that within our communities that we're building them up, right? This is why it's so important, to Andrew's question, that we're working with these community-based organizations, because when we can understand what their needs are, we can help to look at it from a variety of different ways. So yeah, wealth building, community building, additionality, access to things that weren't there before. And of course, we'll probably track the number of loans we do, just because that's a good measurement of what we're doing. And then the leverage factor on public to private investment. So I was showing you that before. If our leverage factor can be, 5 times, 10 times the amount of public investment that we have, we're going to consider ourselves being successful.
To follow up on that, Jen, I might have missed this earlier, but when you're referring to leverage factor, are you referring to leverage in terms of debt financing or in terms of benefits? can
Benefits, yeah.
produce. Got it.
Well, actually, let me take this step back. So what I'm referring to when I said that specific leverage was the amount of public finance that we get. How do we leverage that? Let's say that 100,000 for Buncombe County to attract private capital. And so in that case, it was 100,000 attracting hopefully 4 million. That's the type of leverage that I'm talking about.
Got it.
And if you look at a lot of the, especially the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund documentation, they're looking for that too, right? This is something they don't want to just be putting money out for 5 years. That in 5 years we're all like, wow, now what do we do? What we want to do is use that the 27 billion through the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, leverage that, build the market, build the ecosystem, and so that it's going to continue to grow and grow. And so, when we can leverage, 100K to bring in 4 million, we're going to continue to do that. That's not just going to stop. That's going to continue on and on and on. So we're building a sustainable type of solution.
When you were sharing your slides, the map of the US that showed green banks, not a whole lot. It's fairly new. I think that New York Green Bank has been around for like 10 years or so. So it's still a new thing. Is there an equivalent to this in looking internationally of this type of model that's being utilized elsewhere?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I know, and I haven't tracked it recently, if there are, I think it's, I want to say it's the NRDC, the Natural Resources Center. I think they were tracking the global international green banks. So there are green banks like this that are being established. I haven't been tracking it, so I don't know the numbers. But yeah, try the NRDC. They might be able to, they might have something on their site that talks about that. That's a really good question. And if it's not that, I mean, I think there's similar things to what we're trying to do in the US that are maybe not called green banks, but I know there are a lot of organizations that are trying to do something very similar where they're leveraging a smaller amount of capital to bring in others from other banks, like larger banks.
So we have a question from Pooja. What types of risks do you face with the projects you work with, and how do you mitigate these risks?
Yeah, good question, right? So if we're reducing risk for other lenders, we're obviously taking on some risk ourselves, right? So, we are a nonprofit. There's going to be risk, especially non-payment risk, I think is going to be the largest risk. We typically don't take a lot of collateral. Most of our loans are going to be unsecured. Maybe we'll take a lien on a solar panel. That's a really difficult thing to probably get repaid on. So we're taking a risk, but we're a nonprofit organization. So we're going to build that amount of risk into what we do. I mentioned before that we do receive funding through philanthropies. We do get pretty low cost capital, hopefully through the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. Some of that's going to enable us to be riskier. And so we'll take the risks so the other financial institutions don't have to. So yeah, it's a good question, Pooja. And I think we needed to keep top of mind that there are going to be defaults, there are going to be risks, but hopefully what we're doing is proving that there aren't as many as people think there are going to be. In fact, we have found, especially in the a lot of the low income lending that we're doing, if you start to drop credit scores below the 680 level that banks are traditionally used to, your repayments is as high or even higher probably than some of those other types of borrowers. And so we found that default rates are below, I think it's below 0.5%, which is pretty incredible. So people want to repay this. They want to be given the chance to take on these loans.
I thought I might share this, but I took a global energy markets class this past semester, and for our end project, I wrote a report about actually what China is doing to facilitate the clean energy transition. And what they're doing is the People's Bank of China, the central bank, is loaning money to other state-owned banks at 1.5%, at which the state-owned banks are then reloaning to clean energy infrastructure projects at 0.5% below the loan prime rate. So that way the cost of capital are lower.
I love that, Royce. Thank you for sharing that. That's, yeah, exactly. And that's the model that the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund is trying to set up, these national green banks. They'll be nonprofits, not run by the state or by the federal government, but same thing, very low cost capital that they can just flip out to the local and community banks and state banks like ours. I'm so glad you shared that. Thank you.
Me too.
Don't be shy. Ask your questions.
Jen, from a mechanics standpoint, you mentioned your non-depository institution. So who holds the funding in the interim between when you get it from from the greenhouse reduction fund to when it's actually deployed?
We do. So yeah, so we're building our system so that we house that kind of in a reserve fund, which is an interesting prospect because that's something new for North Carolina for sure. But again, we are working with partner banks, and so those funds will be on deposit with some of our partner banks, and we'll just be utilizing them for the deposits.
Are there any exciting things coming that will really help, like grow what you're doing? Like, what are some things that you're excited about going forward, even if it's just like projects or?
Sure. Yeah. So I think one of the biggest is that we partnered with our state energy office here in North Carolina to apply for a solar for all opportunity through the EPA. This is part of the greenhouse gas reduction fund that I mentioned. So we applied for $250 million to roll out solar to low-income and disadvantaged communities, estimating hopefully affecting 20,000 households and enabling them to have solar when they couldn't. And so what we're building with that is what's most exciting. So it's mostly a grant program for the lowest income, but above that, for more moderate income that maybe still couldn't afford a loan, Clean Energy Fund is going to build a low interest loan program to help them be able to. So in addition to the 20,000 very low income, we hope to hit another large amount of households with a low interest program. So yeah, solar for all across North Carolina, super, super exciting. But we have to get the funding. So yeah, we're everybody put in a good thought for that.
Yeah. All right. Looks like that, Chara.
Yes, I have a question because I hear myself twice, but hopefully you don't. Yeah, so you said that one of your main goals is to attract private investments in clean energy. What are the main barriers? So what are the difficulties that private investors, or like what holds private investors back from investing in clean energy?
Yeah, good question. So I think a lot of it is just not an understanding of it. I think especially a lot of the lenders we work with do mortgage loans really well, home equity loans really well, auto loans really well, maybe some startup capital for larger businesses with a guarantor, but they're pretty risk averse, a lot of the ones that we work with. And so I think it's not so much that they don't want to do clean energy lending. I think it's that they don't understand clean energy lending and maybe think that it's too risky for them to get engaged with. And so that's why we bring these credit enhancements like a loss reserve, interest rate buy down, and other things, so that we can kind of entice them in and then help them to understand it's really not as scary as it seems. And it could be kind of this mainstream type of a product that they can eventually offer themselves. So education's really going to be key, I think, in the next 2 to 3 years. How we educate our partner lenders is really going to be important.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
You touched on this a little bit, but highlighting how community members and community partnerships are particularly important for the work that you're doing, as well as different types of partnerships. What ways have you found to be the best with in regards to connecting to community members or connecting with potential partners, whether that's within the state or across the country?
Yeah, I would love to say it's easy, and it definitely is not easy because if you're as a community member, like where you go is different, right? It's depending on what your particular interests are and your needs are. So what we found works pretty well is working with local governments first. Local governments tend to know better in their communities who some of the groups are that might be interested in having these conversations. But honestly, I also find myself just attending a lot of just community events, like going to where people are, right? So if there's a community event that's happening in a small town in North Carolina and I find out about it and I can make it, sometimes I just go and sit and listen, because they don't know that they have a financing need when it comes to clean energy, but something they say while I'm sitting there might just prompt a question. And then I can start to work with whoever there might be interested in it and start to move that forward. So it's really just uncovering it as we go about. I did hear one interesting thing, which I'll share, and I am not by any means saying this is the way to do it, but someone said like barbershops and salons, hanging out in barbershops and salons, you can learn so much about a community, right? So I haven't done that yet, but yeah, if any of you do, let me know. I thought that was an interesting way, but it really is, it's going to where people are, because they're not gonna, I mean, we've tried I've been in this industry for 10 plus years, and I've tried so many different ways to attract community-based organizations to listen in on webinars, to come to listening sessions, to do engagement. And some will come, but they just don't, there's so many things going on. It's really hard to say, come talk to me about your needs in the clean energy financing space. You're not going to get anybody to do that. So it has to be tied to something else that's really important to them, that maybe you can break down a silo. And, you know, affordable housing, actually, sorry, I'm going to keep rambling. Affordable housing is a really good place to look at for clean energy, because they have needs, and some of them, you know, maybe are paying outrageous expensive utility bills, but they don't know that's a need for energy efficiency or for solar or for some other type of product. But you do when you're listening in, and so you can start to think about how does that relate to their affordable housing challenges, and how do I weave those two together?
Thank you so much. I love that, and that kind of anticipating the needs of community members by being physically present. I feel like that's key. That's awesome.
Yeah, and I love that question, Victoria. And I'll just go one step further, actually, because it just reminded me of something I wanted to say. I think all too often, financial institutions especially develop products because they think there's a need. We have to flip that. We have to develop a product because there is a need. So it has to start at the community level first, because if you develop a product that they don't perceive there's a need for, even if you're really sure there is one, they're not going to use it. And then we've wasted a lot of time and energy doing that. So it's really, really important to get it right and to work with the community to develop it. Really, really good question, Victoria.
Thank you so much.
You talked a lot about, you know, how the Inflation Reduction Act and some of the other in the infrastructure bill have been helpful. I guess it would be really interesting to hear kind of what is maybe a policy or implementation that has not been in one of those that you think would be incredibly helpful for green banks or for the space overall.
Interesting. Yeah, so for years, that national green bank thing, the idea was floating around. It had passed the House for a bit and never made it through to the Senate, which is why when the Inflation Reduction came out with the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, we all jumped up and down. So I think just, yeah, I know you're asking what else beyond that, but I think that was huge. So I do have to say, again, that the fact that there was this Greenhouse Reduction Fund is huge for green banks. Beyond that, I think, I don't know how from a policy perspective, but one of the things that I think is really important is how green banks work closely with state and local government and with utilities, these rebates that are coming out. It's important that we work together to figure out how we can utilize those to reduce the initial cost up front so that we don't have to finance as much. So I think to the extent we can build policies that kind of cross-pollinate ideas across different platforms, I think that would be helpful. And then I'll go back to what I was talking about with Victoria, affordable housing. You know, anything new from an affordable housing perspective, especially if it's a new build, it needs to be including a lens of energy efficiency and perhaps even solar and storage in it. And I think all too often we just think about, we need to get affordable housing out there for people. We need people to have a place to live. And we forget that there's going to be this longer term benefit to doing some of these energy efficiency and renewable energy things. So maybe some type of policy, Darian, that would kind of combine the two together, and so that it's not an afterthought, that it's included right up front. Electrification of vehicles is another good example. Every new house or multifamily unit or even business that's being built should be built EV ready. I mean, if we want to have the EV transition, we've got to do that up front so that when a house is being built, it's already ready for anything that the household or the business wants to do. I'm sure there are others. So Darian, as you're doing your projects, I'd love to hear more.
Yeah, 100%. That was really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeff, are you going to ask me a hard question?
No. Well, we'll see. But no, I'm getting on here to remind all the students that you have you have Jen at your disposal to answer questions, and even if it's not energy related, about how she engages with different stakeholders, which have already been asked, but those who haven't asked questions yet, this is your opportunity to ask some more questions about stakeholder engagement, impact measurement, all those kinds of things.
I answered them all. There were some really good questions. I love the questions.
Good. Okay, so I'll ask a question here, because you mentioned it's really important in response to Victoria's question to engage communities first. So if somebody's starting from scratch right now and has a timeline, right, because proposals are due January 31st, what would you suggest if, let's say they reach out to communities, they don't get responses back between now and January 31st. How do they try to summarize risks or barriers that they haven't been able to talk to the communities about in a proposal? How would you suggest, summarizing how they'll be prepared for those kinds of barriers, or how they're going to address those kinds of communities?
Yeah, so I would imagine as these projects are being put together, there's a reason for why they're coming up with these proposals, right? And so I would just lean in on that. What was in your mind? Why did this idea come to you to begin with, right? You saw something. So lean in on that. Any research you can do on that issue, even if it's not in the particular community that you're looking to serve. So perhaps you saw something that's working well in China, let's say, and maybe that could be something that could be brought to another nation or the United States. I guess that's the way I would lean in on it, but I would definitely within your project put a piece in there that you are going to not do a focus group, but you are going to make sure that resonates with the particular community that you want, because I cannot emphasize enough that you do not want to come up with a program that just doesn't seem interesting to them. But certainly, I mean, I can only imagine where you guys are coming up with your ideas. I'm sure that there's a glimmer of something that you saw that needs to be done. So just lean in on that piece of it.
And you mentioned this, you might have mentioned this earlier, and I apologize for being in and out. But you mentioned this in my class a couple of weeks ago too, is you talked about community leaders and finding those connections. How would you suggest they go about figuring out who the community leaders are in the locations that they'd be looking to?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way that we do it is, I mentioned that, were you there for the barbershops and salons comment? No, you were not there for that part.
I didn't know. I wasn't.
I said, this isn't something that I've actually done yet, but I've heard, you want to go to where the community is. So go to where people are in order to find out who the leaders are, what they're talking about, what the main issues are. Faith congregations are good. I've heard barbershops and beauty salons are good. I work a lot with local governments. They often have their ear to the ground and can connect me with the right people. Yeah, it's hard. I would say that's probably one of the hardest parts to the things that we're trying to do is getting the right people who have the time and the capacity to sit down with you and talk about it. But again, I can't emphasize how important it is that even if you think it's not directly related to the particular project that you want to be, sometimes just sitting in on a community event that you do find can really unlock doors and maybe even make you more aware of things, ways that you can tie your particular program into something that's already a barrier within a community. So yeah, definitely keep your ears to the ground and listen for that, because it may come at you from a really different place than where you thought it was going to come from.
Fantastic, thank you. Any other questions while you have Jen here? I know we're coming close to time anyway, but.
Yeah, hi Jens. Can I ask the question also about dealing with the stakeholder, especially your learner, people who because one thing that you get people from the community to be interested in your products, which is the loan. But another thing is how we should make sure that those money are being put into the impacts that you want to see. Is there any kind of standard or rules, because you don't have collateral from any of those? You don't have collaterals. You also, yeah. I just very interested in to see like how do you figure out when you giving out this money for mission basis or impact based, but yeah, how you make sure those money are used in a good way or good
Yeah.
measure by the people who are who are less educated about it, but also maybe not interested first, but like they see the potential to have the money and they go for it. And so how you make sure it turn out to be a right decision.
Really good question. So a lot of what we do, as I mentioned before, is work with contractors. And so part of the requirement with the contractors are that they're going to be doing a quality assurance on the end. So let's say you're putting solar panels on a roof and the Clean Energy Fund is providing the financing for it. We will not do the final payment until it's been verified by that contractor that those solar panels have been put on. You can also, and we haven't done this yet, but you could also build in certain requirements for that those solar panels have to be operated by maybe the contractor for 5 years, 10 years. There has to be a warranty on them, et cetera. So you can put different criteria in place as you do the loans, even if they're not collateralized. You can put requirements in there for either reporting or that there is this quality assurance test done to make sure that the proper technology was actually implemented. Was that your question, Michael? Did I answer that?
Yeah, correct. So you basically don't give the money directly to the community, but instead go dealing with contractor directly, right? Yes, between between the public funding, the private funding, and then the contractors, not with like community, basically the users basically for the service after the service is done.
It could go either way. So it could go directly to the homeowner, let's say, or it could go to the contractor. But either way, there needs to be a contractor engaged that we can work with to make sure that the deployment was done correctly. So it could go either way, and you can write that into the loan documents for who actually gets paid for it. But we wouldn't just write a check for $10,000 and say, yeah, we trust you to go get the heat pump. We're going to make sure that there's things on the back end that assure us that that's where the money went. Yeah, so definitely as you're thinking about, I'm not sure what your project is, but as you're thinking about your project, work into there those kind of qualifying types of things that you'll need to make sure that your impact is going where it's supposed to be going.
Yeah.
Good
Thank
question.
you.
Yeah, really good
Thank
question.
All right, any final questions for Jen while we have her for 6 more minutes?
Well, I'm super excited to be a judge. Victoria reached out, and so thank you. I'm really excited to be a judge. I cannot wait to see all of your great projects in the spring.
Thank you so much, Jen. And for all of those who are here, I'm also putting in the chat, don't forget that tomorrow we have another wonderful coaching session at the same time. I put the link, the Zoom link for tomorrow in the chat as well. And that will be from an impact investing expert who has worked on blended finance related to things like affordable housing, as well as CDFIs, but he'll be concentrating on affordable housing, stakeholder engagement, social impact, metrics and measurement, et cetera. So
can I listen into Dan's?
Yes, absolutely. So you can copy down the link, Jen, and come to that one as well if you'd like.
I might do that.
Fantastic. All right, everybody, take care of yourselves, stay happy and healthy, and let us know what we can help with. If you have questions, never hesitate to reach out to us, or if you're looking for more resources, let us know. And we will see you all tomorrow.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thanks, Jen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Recording.